Welcome to the Dark Shadows Podcast with your co-hosts Vicky Ray, Tom Diamond, and Keith Chowgle, bringing you all the odd goings-on from Collinsport, Maine.
Hello, welcome to Literary License Podcast, and today we're discussing Dark Shadows, episode 266 to 285. And before we get started, let's find out who's with us. Today we have one of our new co-hosts, Jesse Fultz. Hello, Jesse.
Hello, how's it going?
And of course we have Tom Diamond with us as well. Hello, Tom.
Hey, everybody. Hi, Keith. Hope everybody is doing well and safe.
And Vicky Ray won't be with us. She's having Wi-Fi difficulties. Apparently in Texas, they're still well behind the curve as far as everyone's Wi-Fi coverage goes. So hopefully we'll have Vicky here next week or maybe tomorrow for our interview, which will give you more information about that and the next episode of our Dark Shadow special feature episode.
We miss you, Vicky. We miss you.
We will talk about... You miss Vicky? I don't. She's a stone around my neck, that woman. A stone around my neck.
I'm political.
So before we get started, let's talk about our roses and thorns of the week. And we'll start with Tom. What's your rose and thorn of the week?
Wow. I would say, you know, my PhD coursework essentially is going pretty well with the exception of my thorn was a bad professor, but but this situation was taken care of, and that was a really bad thorn. But in any university system, I guess you can have that. I'm actually now under a special mentorship, proceeding to submit to conventions. So we'll see what happens with that. And so academically, it's probably one of the best times for me. And also, you know, considering what's been going on, I think the biggest rose is being glad I'm alive and without any issues with COVID. And the thorn, of course, remains COVID. I think that's going to remain with us for a while. And I hope that you can only hope and pray. If we are now going through what Liz went through for 18 years. So now we know how it feels, Liz. We do indeed. So that's me.
What about yourself, Jesse? What's your rose and thorn of the week?
Let's see. My rose. Well, COVID has allowed me all the time in the world to work on projects. And actually, I've kind of had like a huge, outpouring of all these different crazy fun ideas that I'm really excited about. So luckily, I have nothing but time, days and nights of my tomorrows to work on this stuff. And my thorn is that COVID has made sure that we don't have any good music or any good films coming our way for quite some time because no one's able to come together and work on stuff. So there's no good music. I've listened to everything that's come out a million times since then, like from some of my favorite bands, but now there's nothing. So we have to wait for some new stuff, I guess.
And let's sit there and see. My rose has to be, I'm kind of thinking, wow, I guess there's been some stuff I've been catching up on Amazon Prime. I mentioned it last week, Upload. I really like that series a lot. I love the idea that when you die, they put your subconscious into this new world, this virtual world, which is a great little series. I've enjoyed that immensely.
What is it?
I'll Upload on Amazon Prime.
Oh, have you seen Altered Carbon? Because that's similar.
Yeah. It's kind of like this, but this one's kind of more it's got more lighthearted. It's got a lot of comedy to it and a lot of heart. Where Altered Carbon, which is another excellent series, is more of the darker side of things. So.
Okay.
I just discovered Ozark, which is also on Amazon Prime, with Justin Bateman, and it is surprisingly very, very good. Also, I think it's Afterlife, the British show, which has 2 seasons and a third. It's really they're really both excellent, completely different, but they're really excellent.
And my thorn of the week is menopause baby mothers. I'm sorry, but at the moment they're running around. I don't know what they're doing in the rest of the world, but here they're running around. They're like between ages of 40 and 50. We'll call them Karens. And they're kind of running around, and it's like they got the mask on, they got the gloves on, and the thing is they walk around with these sticks, and they like hold them there, so they go social distancing, and they're like screaming at you. While meanwhile, their kids crawling all over the place with no mask or gloves on, like the little horrible child running around, and then they're screaming this at you. Then they'll see each other, and they'll take their mask and gloves on, and like hug and kiss another menopause mother, and they're kissing each other, and then they put the mask back on. It's like, oh, hypocritical people. So basically, I just want to. Well, one of them yelled at me it was yesterday. And I just kind of looked at her and going, I just wanted to lick her face, but I didn't. Or start talking to her at hard H times. Hi, how are you? My germs all over. But I didn't do that. But anyways, yeah, they're kind of getting on my nerves. It's kind of, and that's the social policing that people are doing is really irritating the hell out of me. So
it's certain. It seems to be certain groups that do it in that particularly annoying way.
Menopause women who are between 40 and 50, and basically, and they had sat in there, had their last chance of life, baby. You know what I mean? Those women. It's like, come on. It's like, give me a break. I mean, and if any of our listeners are out there, are fit this group, I am sorry. Anyway, moving on. Today we're going to cut to Story Geek. For this down, you need something to watch. Story Geek is about to give you a bunch of films that are being released or television series that you can download for free this week. Take it away, Story Geek.
What movies and TV shows should you be watching the week of May 18th? I'm Jay Shear, co-host of the Story Geeks podcast, and here are the movies and TV shows you can watch from home. We've got some new movies available to rent this week. The Way Back, a movie about a basketball player who fell from grace and returns to coach his former alma mater. The Way Back stars Ben Affleck and has a 68 on Metacritic. Sonic the Hedgehog, taking its cues from the video game of the same name. Jim Carrey is in this one. Should be good for the whole family. It has a 47 on Metacritic. Onward. We've talked about Onward several times as it was available for purchase early after theaters shut down. It's also available on Disney Plus, so if you have a Disney Plus account, you don't need to pay for it, just watch it over there. But it is now also available to rent. Onward has a 61 on Metacritic, is suitable for the whole family, and gets a strong recommendation from me. I thought it was fantastic. Emma, which is based on Jane Austen's novel, is also now available for you to rent. Emma has a 71 on Metacritic. And finally, Brahms the Boy 2, a horror movie I've talked about on this segment before, is also available this week for rent. Brahms the Boy 2, which I'm guessing means there was a Brahms the Boy 1, I really don't know, has a 29 on Metacritic. New to streaming, 3 great movies are available on Netflix now. Public Enemies, the John Dillinger film starring Johnny Depp, has a 70 on Metacritic. I thought it was a great movie. I'll be watching it again. United 93, a fantastic film about the September 11th attacks, has a 90 on Metacritic. That gets a strong recommendation from me. And also District 9, a sort of classic sci-fi movie that has an 81 on Metacritic, can also be seen on Netflix this week. Over on Amazon Prime, you've got The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, which I believe may also be on Netflix. If you want to see Brad Pitt slowly get more Brad Pitt-like, that's the movie for you. It has a 70 on Metacritic. Over on Hulu and Disney Plus, you can watch a Taylor Swift concert. It gets a giant no from me, but if you're into Taylor Swift, there you go. It's available. I will, however, recommend The Gallery on Disney+, which is a behind-the-scenes look at The Mandalorian. I loved that show. This continues to be a great show with new episodes coming out every week. All of the behind-the-scenes stuff on The Mandalorian is great. Check that out on Disney+. As for my pick, The Wrong Missy didn't get great ratings, but I watched it and laughed throughout. It's a bit more adult-themed than your standard Happy Madison production, but it made me laugh. I'll definitely be watching Public Enemies again, as I mentioned earlier. And if you haven't seen United 93, well, that's my first recommendation to you. It is an excellent must-watch film in my mind. This week on the latest The Story Geeks podcast, we dig deeper into Snowpiercer, the movie starring Chris Evans. Helen O'Hara, a film critic from Empire Magazine and one of our good friends at this point, she's been on the podcast with us numerous times, joined us on that show, and it was a fantastic show. You can find the Story Geeks podcast on your preferred podcast provider. Until next week, this has been Jay Shear from the Story Geeks podcast, and I hope you have fun streaming movies and TV shows at home.
Hello, welcome back to Literary License Podcast, and we're discussing Dark Shadows 266 to 285, and we have now come to our Out of the Shadows segment with Tom Diamond, as he gives us trivia about the episodes, about bloopers, and everything in between. Take it away, Tom.
Well, thank you, Keith. And first, maybe I boned up on an extra episode because I thought it was 266 to 286, but notwithstanding. It's been quiet in terms of current goings on in the world of Dark Shadows, so I'm going to cut right to the chase and go into the old and new stars that we see on this block. First of all, you've got the three widows of Widow's Hill, and the characters are revealed as Rachel Comstock, Abigail Tolliver, and Margaret Findlay. And they are played, and I don't know respectively who they're played by, but Joy Nicholson, Bridget O'Donnell, and Marin Riley are the three widows. Of those three, Marin Riley marks a return to her character as a widow. She was a widow when Matthew Morgan got killed, so she's come back for more. Interestingly enough, Joy Nicholson, who comes on in 266, then comes on in I believe it's the next episode, as a Blue Whales extra. So that's the only example that we have of a widow in one episode, and she jumps into the present as a Blue Whales extra. Anthony George, of course, is back as Burke, and you're going to see him a lot in this particular segment. In terms of Blue Whales extras, Jay Gregory is listed, and he starts in 269. He's a veteran of Somerset. He was in Chinese Exclusion Act, Eugenics Crusade, and a number. So basically, soap opera veterans as well, and Taps. Taps was a movie from 1970. So he is another veteran. Of course, Bob O'Connell is back. Tom Gorman is interesting. Tom Gorman usually plays a Blue Whale patron, but for one episode, he decides to be the bartender, and you see him as that's a little bit of a switch for him. Maybe they were giving him some extra money. Okay, House Jameson, and that's from episode 270, is the judge who attempts to marry Liz and Jason. And again, that's from episode 270. House Jameson has been on The Doctor's Naked City, Robert Montgomery Presents, Route 66. And I like this performance, by the way. I mean, he was on for only 2 episodes, 270 and 271. But he did a good job, basically. Catherine Quint is noted to be the hand of Carolyn. In one episode, and it's 270, there was a scene where Carolyn was in the Blue Whale, and while she was trying to get back to her next take, Carolyn Quint pulled the gun out of the drawer, Interestingly enough, though, Carolyn Quint is wearing the wedding dress. They did think enough to bandage both of them because, remember, Nancy Barrett was getting over a wrist accident. And so Nancy Barrett had that bandage on her wrist. Carolyn Quint also had that bandage, but she was wearing a wedding dress, and Carolyn was wearing a turtleneck. So when we switch back to Carolyn, she's in the turtleneck again. You can, of course, just see the sleeve, but you see it's a totally different thing. The big thing here is, well, Joe Fabiani. And Joe Fabiani plays Paul Stoddard in the 1949 flashback, which is episodes 271 and 272. And he has been on Broadway. He did the pilot of Ironside back in '67. He's been on Starsky and Hutch, Marcus Welby, and he was in the picture Black Sheep Squadron in 1976, among a couple of other things. And the interesting thing about Joe Fabiani is he was on a soap opera at the time. You will not see him from the front. Well, you're not supposed to see him from the front. All his shots, you see him from the back. And the reason for that, they theorize, is because he was on another soap opera. This was a day job. And according to his contract, they weren't supposed to show his face. But because the wonderful cameraman decided to pull back too fast, if you've got DVD or if you've got something where you can stop the tape on Amazon Prime, look for 6 minutes and 40 seconds approximately, and also 7 minutes and 56 seconds approximately. And yes, you will be able to see the face of Joe Fabiani that you were never supposed to see. Okay, Dana Elcott comes back as Sheriff Patterson in episodes 272 and 273. The deputy, who just basically is in the back when Jason is brought back to Collingswood, is Ed Souter in episode 273. And I wonder, Timothy Gordon, we have brought his name to your attention before, as the hand of Barnabas, who usually comes up out of the coffin to strangle people. And I kind of wonder whether Timothy Gordon was the one that strangled Jason in episode 275, if you remember that. And Jason is like and Dennis Patrick is trying to squirm, and his hat falls off and everything. So that may have been Timothy Gordon, but I have no way of verifying that. We talked about Alice Drummond in the last block, who was Maggie's nurse, and she is back for episodes 276 and 283. And, of course, Grayson Hall now starts to get into the picture as Julia in 279 and 282. Sharon Smythe is there as Sarah in a number of episodes. Robert Geringer is Dr. Woodard. And we now see a kind of an interplay between Dr. Woodard and Grayson Hall. I always said Dr. Woodard is the Dr. Kildare of Dark Shadows, and Grayson Hall is the effete medical bitch who then they both give each other a hard time. I kind of like that. Episode 276 marks the last appearance of Dennis Patrick as Jason, as you people probably know who have seen it already, and we hope those who haven't will. He was killed off. Okay, luckily with bloopers, we do not have a whole bunch of bloopers in this block. They were being careful, as opposed to the last couple of episodes when they were on strike back in April of 67, and they had to do 6-day weeks for almost a month and a half. There were like 40 bloopers per episode, and everybody was dying, and I was dying from having to drone on about them. I will say that there are garden variety, I call them the garden variety bloopers, and those are essentially the shadows of the mics, shadows of the booms, shadows of the cameras. I'm not going to go into those in great detail. I just want to go into the biggies. So very briefly, episode 266, the famous blooper when Liz is talking to Mrs. Johnson and describing the widows, the origin of the widows. And she's talking about the first one who had 5 sons. And instead of saying she had 5 sons, she said she had 5 cents. And then she changes that for 5 sons. Okay.
Mrs. Johnson has 5 sons?
Yeah, the first widow.
Oh, the first widow. Okay.
The first widow has 5 sons.
Oh, I thought you meant. Okay.
No. Unless that could be a whole new plot line that you're thinking of. No, but instead of saying 5 sons, she said she had 5 cents.
Okay, got you. The widows.
Yeah, and she's certainly wealthier than that. The interesting thing now, of course, we learned the birth dates for Roger from the Bible. Roger is September 24th, 25. What is he, a Virgo? I'm not sure. Liz is February 28th of 1917, so she's a Pisces. And Carolyn is July 16th, 46, so I think she's a Cancer. The interesting thing is that when Elizabeth puts her date of death as April 10th, 1967, well, this show actually aired in just after July 4th in 1967. It was shot in mid-June of 1967. So why the hell do you see a date of death back in April? And the show is done a few months after the only thing I can think of is when the writers, and Keith, you'll probably verify, it was probably written around April of 1967, and the writers weren't thinking. But that's my take on it. There is, okay, because of my lousy handwriting, I can't see which episode this is, but please look for the credits in one of the episodes where you see Josette's room. And in the window alcove of Josette's room, right behind the door, you're going to see a stagehand very clearly visible walking in the alcove. He looks like he's looking for something, so he walks back and forth between the two. He's wearing sneakers. He's got a watch. If that guy's still alive, please let him come forward and contact us at info@llpodcast.com. We'd love to hear from him. Okay. Keith is smiling as I say that. Liz.
I'm the hand. You?
Oh, I thought you were.
You're like, who?
No, I thought you were the hand later on. And we see Jesse's hand. Jesse's relative probably played the hand. It looks like he's trying to do he's trying to do sign language now, which that'll be
actually.
good.
I think he was the extra for. He was a stand-in for Thing in the Addams Family.
Oh, okay. Actually, I thought that was Felix Silla, but let's not worry about that.
That was my first bit into Hollywood.
He was Thing's stunt double.
Well, you could be a hand model. There you go, Jesse. Oh, and I do want to digress. Jesse is an accomplished graphic artist. We haven't mentioned that about him. But, my God, if you looked at his work, you would really, really be impressed. I was telling him that if he were around on Dark Shadows, Sam would have to pack up and move out of town because of the competition. So anyway, Jesse's trying not to blush. Okay. So, all right. I kind of like the line where David says, and this goes back to a running joke that we have on the show, Jesse, you're hearing this for the first time, where David says to Liz, why can't I go to Bangor with Miss Winters? And Liz says, you can go to Bangor another time. So, so once again, the Bangor jokes are still coming up. Now it's David banging Vicky rather than Burke banging Vicky. Burke and Vicky went. Burke went to Bangor a number of times.
Everyone's taking Vicky to Bangor.
That's correct. Now David's taking Vicky to Bangor. We have to talk about that from a sexual abuse standpoint, Keith. Okay. This is a good one. I don't think anybody ever picked this up before, but somebody correct me if I'm wrong, and I'm sure they will. In episode 269 said, do you remember when Burke did this investigation with Jason, and he comes up with these papers, and he shows the papers to Jason, and Jason's reading them off. Well, if you look closely and you've got a big screen, you will see that what he's reading off of with extortion, and the word extortion is in the piece of paper. And what you will see is that, I believe, is a Dark Shadows script, because I have a couple of them. And and at one point Jason's looking at him and you got to look upside down, but it sure looks like a Dark Shadow script to me with the characters and the lines. So that would be interesting. We talked about Joe Fabiani's face when that is seen. We have teleprompters that come up a couple of times in the corner of the left-hand corner of Jason's room in a portrait in episode 270. I always wondered why when Burke is trying to dig up the grave with Sheriff Patterson in the basement, why Burke is doing that in a full suit. Episode 274, it's the last time you hear "My name is Victoria Winters." From this point on, it will all be neutral voiceovers. Alexandra Moltke will continue to do Victoria Winters for 111 more times. But right after that, I think Carolyn does the next one. I think meaning Nancy Barrett, Catherine Leigh Scott does one. And then it's still basically all Vicky, all Alexandra Moltke, but no more of that.
Didn't Grayson Hall do one as well?
Later on.
Oh, no, that's the next block, isn't it?
Later I think it happens. I think it starts. I think every episode after that starts kind of with who's going through the most in Collinsport or something, or when someone is starting to show out. I forget how that works, but there was something that seemed to kind of happen that would cause them to be the narrator for that episode. But because Vicky was usually the protagonist, she was the one to start out until they just changed everything.
Well, even Jonathan does voiceovers later on in the show when they need.
It's probably who was on set that day as well, so that way they don't have to pay him extra to come in and do a voiceover.
That was much later. Also,
now the cast is getting bigger. They have to cut somewhere.
Oh yeah. Also prominent when Jason breaks into the house to steal the jewelry box. The jewelry box in the episode at the end of 275 is on the table in the drawing room, and all of a sudden in 276 it is no longer there, and all of a sudden it magically moved to the basement. And of course, the reason for that plot is because they wanted Jason to search in the basement for that, so Barnabas could kill him off when he finds the coffin. I do want to say, Vicky in the last episode did mention she wanted to know where the name of Grayson Hall came from. I have found that out, and essentially, the stage name, Grayson Hall's stage name was Shirley Grayson, and her husband Sam Hall liked the name Grayson because it reminded him of, it was like a slang term for an old army buddy. So she switched her name then to Grayson Hall.
Because her husband considered her to be like an old army buddy?
That Grayson reminded him of an old army buddy. Now, whether that was her or whether that was someone else. But
I'm thinking he might have been a little, rainbow buddy.
Well, I mean, we're talking World War II here, guys. So
there's rainbow buddies in World War II.
So who knows? Also, a thing about the original Josette's theme that's currently playing now. And for everybody's information, that was originally Robert Farnham was the conductor of that theme. He was a Canadian composer. That was in the ABC vault. So they used that theme in the original Josette's theme. Dan Curtis, however, wanted to make sure he had an ownership in any of the music that was done in Dark Shadows, and Robert Cobert did that. So that's why he asked Robert Cobert later on to do an original rendition of Josette's theme, which took its place. I personally think it's a lot better, and it's the one we all know and love. Okay. And also notice in 283, you're going to see Josette's grave, and her dates are, she was born in 1800, she died in 1822. That is later going to be proven wrong when we get to a certain block where we are going to, and I don't want to give too much away for the fans, but that block is going to take place in the year 1795. So it would be interesting for Josette to appear 5 years before she was born. And I believe that there are a couple, like I said, there are a couple of other things. Look for a couple of other teleprompter issues in episode 279. And look for a Klieg light in the drawing room of Collingswood at episode 277 when Vicky opens the doors to Barnabas. But that essentially are the bloopers for today.
Yay. Well, thank you for that, Tom. What we're going to do now is we're going to cut to a commercial break, and then we're going to be going into the shadows. We can find out what's been going on between episodes 266 to 285 on Dark Shadows.
Sorry for the brief interruption, but I wanted to give you a gift. This is Jay Shear, author of the Amazon top-selling time travel novel Timeslingers and co-host of the Story Geeks podcast. We just released the Kindle edition of Death of a Bounty Hunter, our new supernatural steampunk Western novel, and I'd love for you to have it. With so many of us staying at home, we wanted to give you something. So we released the book early and discounted it to just 99 cents. You can learn more at deathofabountyhunter.com, but here's Mockingbird Preacher Witch, a character from the novel, to tell you what it's about.
This isn't a story about the man-ogre with a Gatling gun for an arm, or the Taiwan sorceress covered in tattoos, or even the long-winded banker. And while the speedster idiot and the large, very funny Pinkerton detective lady do play a role, it's not about them either. You might think this tale is about the Sheriff of Jericho, a man who will do just about anything to save a loved one, including work for a secret occultish society. And then there's a woman who bears the brunt of his sins and must defend herself when she's most vulnerable. All those characters appear in the story. I do too. But it's about more than that. The one I was assigned to, the Korean bounty hunter, he's at the dead center of it all. Flint, a bounty hunter who comes face to face with something we all do. Guilt and shame. And the desire to run from them. Not because we're cowards, but because sometimes we just can't stand ourselves. It's a story about that. The Gatling guns, the occult, the paranormal, and even the demon spawn. All those are just along for the ride. Mockingbird Preacher Witch. Like I said, I'm in the story. Just read it.
Mockingbird Preacher Witch is voiced by Anastasia Washington in the full cast audiobook coming out later this summer. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoy this gift from us to you while you stay at home. To get the Kindle edition for just 99 cents, visit deathofabountyhunter.com. That's deathofabountyhunter.com.
Hello, I'm Vicki Ray.
And I'm Jesse Fultz.
And this is the Collinsport News. We open up at Collinwood with Elizabeth having a dream about widows. It seems that she's unable to sleep because the widows are beckoning her to throw herself off Widow's Hill. Although this is not clear why this is occurring, considering that she killed Paul and Paul was not killed by the sea, it is important that she high dives off the cliff. Personally, I think she can't sleep because she's still wearing her bra under her nightgown.
Elizabeth goes for a long walk that starts at breakfast and finds herself late for dinner. Mrs. Johnson finds her at the top of the cliff, where Elizabeth gives a history of the three widows, though it seems Josette is not exclusive member of the cliff divers. After reciting the history of the aptly named Widow's Cliff, Elizabeth falters forward only for Mrs. Johnson to pull her back.
Elizabeth returns back to the house, preoccupied with death. When isn't she? Elizabeth apparently in one of her half-full type of moods and writes her death into the family book of births and deaths. Most people have their birth and deaths in a family Bible, but not the Collins family. They have a whole book just dedicated to the statistical information. David's family, of course, seems to add this book to his scholastic reading list and shows it to Victoria. Victoria is, of course, alarmed. And when is Victoria not alarmed? She is a whiny little bitch.
Melancholy Elizabeth says goodbye to Carolyn and David as she prepares for her eternal plunge. Victoria persuades Elizabeth not to go cliff diving, and it appears that Elizabeth takes heed of Victoria's advice. Elizabeth lets Victoria into the whole sordid business of what happened to Paul Stoddard.
And
I did it. I killed him.
What'd he do?
I did it. I killed him.
I know. Meanwhile, Passive Burke, I like how we're calling him Passive Burke, confronts Jason with evidence of his criminal activity. Old Burke would have rumbled and tumbled, and new Burke is like a wet noodle smashing against somebody's face.
Yep.
Great visual there. It is unclear whether Passive Burke will be able to handle aggressive Burke's dialogue. We shall wait and see.
The big day has come, and Carolyn has decided that the best wedding present she could give her mother is to bring a gun to the proceedings.
Right.
The big lavish wedding that Jason thought he was going to get seems to exclude the whole town and David. Carolyn aims her gun through a handbag that she has brought, and one does kind of wish she would fire the gun just to see her handbag fly in the air and with her arms flip with the recoil of the shot. One has to wonder if this would have been better, because we are now going to hear the tale of the death of Paul Stoddard, which is one of the lamest story arcs that we will experience. Really, is this what they came up with? My grandmother could have done a better job, and she had dementia.
I know, right? Anyway, instead of saying I do, Elizabeth states that she kills Paul Stoddard, or killed, I should say. We then get an odd flashback with the actor being so embarrassed over this teased storyline that he hides his face from being shown. It seems that Paul, I know you can't see him, it seems that Paul was leaving with a bag of money. Elizabeth hits him over the head, leaves the drawing room when Jason appears. I would have made sure personally that he was dead. Elizabeth spends the rest of the time clutching her pearls while Jason states that Paul is dead and to bury him in the basement. I guess the smell of a rotten corpse in a basement will not permeate through the house. I guess as the pre-John Wayne Gacy and maybe decomposing corpses don't smell in 1967.
That they do not. The police are called and they arrive, and with the help of Burke, anyone know why Passive Burke would be at this wedding, really? When did he become an intimate member of the crew? Anyway, the police and Burke decide to dig up the basement with its dirt floor.
Seriously.
I never really understood that. They pull out the chest and we all learn one thing that day. Paul Stoddard was a dwarf because apparently his body could have fit in that chest. Sorry, I digress. Paul Stoddard's body is not anywhere to be found. No dust, no skeleton, no decaying flesh, no scratch marks on the lid of the coffin. Well, it's not really a coffin, it's like a pirate chest. Yes. Of course, Jason is running away from the law during all of this, and he is fighting so much for his freedom, he doesn't seem to leave the grounds. They finally drag him back to the main house, where he confesses that Paul is not dead, and that he assisted Paul in his escape. Apparently, Elizabeth's 18 years of lockdown was for nothing. No shit. Elizabeth agrees to let Jason go just as long as he never returns.
Forget this lockdown shit. Jason leaves the main house and lurks around the grounds as he has no money. He has on his traveling clothes, which we haven't seen since his first appearance, and apparently traveling around in a seaman's outfit is the only way to go. He becomes a peeping Tom and sees Willie holding Barnabas's family jewels. Another visual. Jason confronts Willie afterward and tries to blackmail, but how you can blackmail someone who has become Barnabas's bitch boy. Willie goes back inside of the house and disappears to wherever Willie goes in the old house. Does anyone know what Willie does in that house? Does he have a favorite room? Does he go down and dust the cell in the basement? What does he do for a shower and going to the bathroom? Is there running water in this place? And does that mean that Willie whiffs?
Does he even have his own room, or does he sleep in Barnabas' room?
Where the hell does he go?
I don't know. Proceeding on, Jason breaks into the old house like a blind man moving around his house after the furniture has been rearranged. Willie catches him and begs him to leave. The love trilogy of Jason, Willie, and Barnabas is coming to an end. Jason tells Willie that he owes him, but Willie's soul belongs to Barnabas. What is a poor boy to do? I know, let's take Jason into the basement to meet the new beau and give Jason some jewels to see him on his way. Question. Wouldn't money make more sense than jewels? Because what kind of hassle would one have to go to change this into money? Do the jewels have to do something with the nautical theme of the show? Is Jason a pirate and he only wants jewels? And considering that last month he wanted to be a GQ model, I guess the suit does make the man.
And moving right along, Jason decides to tell Barnabas goodbye and thank him for his kind contribution to the Jason Leaving Fund. Jason opens the casket and Barnabas' hand grabs Jason by the throat. It is unclear why Barnabas doesn't snack on Jason, or maybe Barnabas does have the stomach for oily meat. After the deed is done, Barnabas and Willie go upstairs to prepare to get rid of the body, leaving the dead corpse for the ghost Sarah Collins to watch over. Barnabas and Willie return to dispose of the dead body of Jason McGuire. They are going to take him to the old mausoleum room where Barnabas used to reside. How do they get him there? Do they have a car? Will they carry the dead corpse through town? If anybody has their answers, please be sure to email me at info@llpopcast.com, because I really thought that mausoleum was 5 miles away originally.
Meanwhile, at Wyncliffe, Maggie is still reliving her childhood and seems to have not come back to her old self yet. Dr. Julia Hoffman, being the empathetic doctor that she is, wants to stop Dr. Woodard from pushing Maggie too much unless it sets her back. Not quite sure what she means set her back further. Does this mean pushing Maggie into a fetus-like state? Dr. Woodard wins the round and presses Maggie. He produces a sketch of Sarah Collins, and Maggie recognizes the girl by singing her own rendition of London Bridge, which at this point, everyone at home starts
I know.
joining in with their karaoke versions of the classic British children favorite, which that's exactly what I would do every episode.
I don't know about you, but it wore me out after a while.
Yeah,
Back at the mausoleum, Barnabas and Willie bury Jason in the dirt of the mausoleum. Yes, the dirt. It seems the concrete floor from previously has miraculously disappeared. Barnabas seems to be okay to have the slimy worm buried in his old resting place. Personally, it would have been a lot better to bury him in the Paul Started trunk at the new house. It would have shown a sense of symmetry.
After a long day traipsing around Collinsport with a dead body can be exhausting, but what way to spend this exhausting is to have a costume party wearing the clothes of dead people. Barnabas extends the invitation, much to Willie's dismay, to all the people at the new house, except poor little David, who must be off getting his bowl cut trimmed.
Poor kid.
He creepily suggests that Victoria dresses Josette. Victoria wets herself with joy and goes to the old house to pick out her clothes.
What about these visuals here, Keith? Opening an old trunk, all the ancestor clothes are all placed in one little bitty trunk with no moth holes, and they're all in perfect condition. If Barnabas wants everybody to become an entrepreneur, he could market these trunks for old clothes storage. Store your old clothes for over 200 years, which will preserve them and ensure they stay wrinkle-free and fit every family member perfectly.
Exactly, like they were made for them. Really, Vicky? Victoria selects her dress and leaves the room where Sarah finds her old dress in the trunk. Does anyone wonder how her old dress is in the trunk, which is the same one she's wearing? Was she buried in the dress that she's currently wearing? And if she is, what is the dress in the trunk? Did Sarah have the same dress made multiple times, like Scooby-Doo characters?
Yes.
When she was alive, it looked like she never changed her clothes. Does this mean the Collins family dressed Sarah in a uniform? No wonder this girl had no friends.
Truly.
Well, she looked like a pig in the first episode where Victoria meets her in 1795. She looks like a little pig, a pot-belly pig.
She does. But Vicky asks Barnabas if she can invite Passive Burke. Here we go with Passive Burke again. Where the hell did Passive Burke come from, and why does he keep getting invited to the Collins shindigs? Burke befittingly will dress as Jeremiah Collins, the love rival for Josette's affections. No surprise here.
Nope. Everyone arrives at the old house dressed in their ancestors' smelly clothes. Well, they smell like jasmine, so it's fine. As nothing was sent to dry the cleaners before wearing them, it looks like an exciting party with the same people who spend every waking hour together in the drawing room. Willie is nowhere to be found, so obviously Barnabas didn't trust him to act as a servant or a cook. There are no hors d'oeuvres.
Put it up.
Hors d'oeuvres. With a bar that simply just has sherry or whiskey. Boy, they really know how to party in Collinwood.
But Elizabeth, who previously was against the party, is now fearing that maybe a ghost is present. Elizabeth is playing Debbie Downer and not sure if this is her hangover from balancing on the lips of Widow's Hill, or Cliff, I should say, previously. Roger, who oddly enough suggests having a seance, now considering he used to be against this foolishness, has now become an expert on the subject. Roger just needs more parts. I love Roger.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone sits in a circle, including a pensive Barnabas. Victoria goes into a trance, of course, and brings forth Josette without the French accent. And apparently Josette can turn this on for dramatic effect at will. Think Madonna living in the UK with her English accent. It comes and goes at will. It does, too.
Victoria relives Josette's tragic death whilst in her trance. This tends to bring this exciting party to a close, and everyone rushes home to get out of their party gear. As a parting gift for channeling Josette, Barnabas gives Victoria Josette's music box so we can hear this tune on a loop for many more episodes to come. Victoria will become entranced about the music box and start becoming fascinated with the past. Yes, we are at the storyline again where Victoria is nodding towards the past. Now she's running into the past, and she's going to regret it one day.
I actually like the music box thing. But back at Wincliffe, Maggie is under hypnosis by Julia Hoffman, doctor by name, though not sure if this is doctor by nature. Maggie recalls her time spent in the cemetery. Dr. Hoffman decides that a field trip is in store and takes her to the most dramatic place you can take a child like Maggie to. Meanwhile, Victoria decides to hold Josette Day and take flowers to Josette's graves. Wouldn't you know it, she sees Maggie. Imagine. Julia takes Maggie to the mausoleum where she freaks out. Didn't see that one coming.
Of course not. Posing as a historian who wants to write a book about the Collins family history, Dr. Julia Hoffman arrives at the door of Collingswood to search for clues surrounding Maggie's disappearance. We assume that having Maggie freaking out in the Collins mausoleum has actively moved Julia in this direction. Elizabeth is less than enthralled at the idea of a Collins family history bestseller being written and released, though Victoria is intrigued and points Julia in the direction of Barnabas. Julia, having the delicate nature of a steamroller, plows through the old house to ask for Barnabas's help with her new authorship venture. Julia makes some odd statements about past lives and house decorations, right, which seems she may have triggered about Barnabas. Nevertheless, Barnabas will not be helping Julia with her new book.
Even though Julia is starting to get the hots for Barnabas at this point. But Victoria and Burke are supposed to go out when Barnabas arrives and gives Victoria an inscribed message, which is Josette's diary. Victoria is overjoyed as she can bury herself into the past more because she doesn't have a life. Passive Burke is annoyed that he told Barnabas not to give it to her. Victoria is annoyed and decides that tonight she'd rather fancy herself a nice book after Barnabas leaves, and looks like Passive Burke is not taking Victoria to bang her.
Victoria goes to the old house to tell Barnabas, thank you for the book. A sudden storm appears, and Barnabas, though his romantic linguistics, try to make thunder and lightning into some weird sort of pillow talk. Obviously, it works as Victoria is going to spend the night without a toothbrush in Josette's room.
Great.
Barnabas is excited. Willie is nowhere to be found, and it seems Victoria is not coming home. Or Victoria not coming home will not be a problem because no one will ever miss her. Maybe she is not well loved at Collinwood after all.
And that concludes all the news in Collinsport, Maine. And I'm Vicki Ray, and it's going to be a good night for me.
And I am Jesse Foltz, and it is a good night from me, and see you next time with all the news from Collinsport, Maine.
Hello, welcome back to the Literary License Podcast, and we're discussing Dark Shadows, episodes 266 to 285, maybe 286. So what we're going to do is get to our Shedding Some Light, where we're going to be discussing the episodes, and we're going to start with you, Tom. What are your thoughts about this block of episodes?
Well, of course, now one plot line is finally resolved, which is Jason's the whole thing of how Paul really was not killed by Liz, and the whole story is revealed about how Jason and Paul kind of were working in concert. They split the loot. And of course, the whole thing leading, and everybody wants Jason out of Collingswood as a result. And it does wind up with the final denouement of Jason McGuire being killed at the hand of Barnabas when Jason. And interestingly enough, isn't it ironic that Willie found Barnabas because he was looking for the family jewels, and now Jason is killed because he's looking for the same kind of jewels, for Barnabas. I thought that was interesting.
I have to sit there and say, though, as far as the wrap up of the Paul Stoddard storyline, this was kind of like when you're really, really hungry and you basically have a pretzel and that's all you can eat, or like I'm talking about like a dried pretzel stick. And this was as satisfying as that when you're really hungry, because I had to say this was like one of the weakest wrap-ups I've ever seen of any storyline.
I agree with you. I think they wanted to get rid of it.
Well, you know what I would have liked in an ideal world, it would have been really interesting to have Paul Stoddard's body found and then have a good old-fashioned court scene with will Elizabeth get off or will she not? And then he kind of went into that whole history about what exactly happened in their relationship.
But I understand what you're saying.
It would have been interesting.
I think the issue there was they wanted to get away from the mystery, because for a long time, as you know, it was a Hitchcock murder mystery thing going on in the beginning of Shadows, and they saw that this thing with Barnabas was really picking up. They wanted to get into the horror, so I think they were trying to clean up, and they did it down and dirty. Quite frankly, I did kind of like the one day. I always like it when they go back, have flashbacks to other times.
But even that was, to me, that was a bit lazy. What they could have done, they could have done something really interesting. Don't put Paul Stoddard in there. Don't put someone's back in there. But what they could have done is like what Alfred Hitchcock did with Rebecca, where you never see Rebecca in it, but what you do is you see the person's point of view as they're telling you, and the camera's moving things around, and that would have been interesting. That would have been very, very interesting, and they could have done the same thing that they've done there.
Also,
to me, it was just kind of lazy. It's just like and. I mean, we really need to discuss what is going on with the flooring in the basements and in the mausoleums here. One time they're concrete, then they're dirt, then they're concrete, then they're dirt again.
Well, there's dirt on the surface, and there's dirt underneath, and then there's concrete on the top for some reason.
Right.
That's how they did it back then in the 60s.
Or even in the 40s, because this was 1949, so that was when.
Oh, they did it then too.
Yeah.
I mean, let's face it. I mean, if they were supposed to dig up, if Paul Stoddard's supposed to be in the basement, then basically they would have to get a jackhammer down there, sort of thing, then dig up and then find him there, and then reconcrete. And
the deputy, in the meantime, was having a coffee break. They really needed him to help out, and so Sheriff has to enlist Burke's help. And once again, he's digging with the suit, and it looked kind of nutty. But anyway, aside from that, you have a few other plots developing, and one of which now the thing with the widows, which really, I mean, they sounded like the three witches from Macbeth. There's Elizabeth. Sounds like that Star Trek episode. I think it was. I forget which it was where they had a similar. That and you just reminded me of something else. When you first see the three ghosts of the widows, two of them look like they're wearing masks, and it's like really funny. I mean, it's just probably part of the scene where it was the camera was covered over with some sort of material. To make it look, but it looks like they had COVID to me, at least two of them. But that thing with the with the suicide, I mean, the one good thing that came out of the I almost committed suicide plot was the conversation that Vicky had with Liz, where for one of the very, very rare instances where you see her something positive and I mean something really healthy. I mean, look, Dark Shadows is full of neurosis and family secrets, and how everybody's tortured emotionally. But here, Vicky is saying to Liz, "Life is worth living for," and Liz hugs her at the end of the scene. I think it was very well acted between Joan Bennett and Alexandra Mulkey. So you have that little brief thing, and then the costume party. The costume party I thought was absolutely charming, and the seance that followed that. What are your comments?
To there to say though, it's a very. I would, the only thing I think that was lacking in the costume party. I loved the characters that were there, but it would have been nice to have Willie serving drinks or something. Don't know where David was.
Willie probably had a gash on his face though. That's probably why.
That's probably why he's sleeping. It was past his bedtime, probably.
Yeah, but it's kind of like they're doing this kind of costume party sort of thing, and it's basically like they're just dressed up in fancy dress, and they moved from the drawing room that they're normally sitting in and moved to Barnabas's drawing room. I mean, I like the story, don't get me wrong, but it's kind of like, and why it was Passive. I mean, we're gonna call New Burke. We're gonna call him Passive Burke because I'm sorry, but he's kind of. Anthony George, you're probably a lovely person, and thank God you probably never hear this unless you're listening to us in the afterlife. But oh my God, Passive Burke, there's just something really lacking there. I don't know. I mean, at least with Willie, when they recast Willie, that they actually wrote to John Carlin's or New Willie's strengths. Yeah. Here, they're kind of giving Passive Burke the aggressive Burke lines, and there's just
completely
no
deadpan
whatsoever.
Well,
they're
again,
completely deadpan.
I think Anthony George, and we discussed this in the last block, Anthony George gave a very different interpretation of Burke than Mitch Ryan did. And I think they're still kind of writing for the Mitch Ryan character in a way.
Well, yeah, they are. That's the problem, because at least when they got New Willie and they wrote for John Carlin. This is John Carlin's strength, so Willie's going to now be this. Willie's not... old Willie was, I'm a sexual predator, I'm going to rape people. And then when the new Willie came in, we got this more of a,
dimensional
Willie that, a lot of dimensions. We had a Willie that basically had, you kind of felt sorry for him. There was a bit of a heart there. He was a man, he was a fly caught in a spider's web. And we got this whole 180-degree change with Willie. What they should have done is something done with Bark. I mean, first of all, between Mitchell Ryan leaving and aggressive Burke leaving and passive Burke taking his place, and because the Burke storylines are pretty much dead by this point, sort of thing. I mean, the Roger Diane storylines there. So they could have changed Roger's personality and changed everything about Roger with the new the new Burke. And they could have done this very, very easily because Burke hasn't really been in on our screens except popping in here and there to say a couple lines and off he goes. So they could have done something really interesting now.
Or to make out with Vicky,
Well, it's just a very, very weird because what you have here is you got Passive Burke, who's now a member of the Collins family, doing aggressive Burke lines. And
definitely lost.
Why are they?
Yeah.
Yeah,
definitely lost in the translation. Frankly, after that plot line died, I don't think they knew where to put him. But they had to have him as the current love interest because they got rid of Frank Garner, and I wish they had kept him.
I wish that too. I thought he would have been perfect for Vicky.
Yeah, I agree, Jesse.
They were in the same age group as well, so it wasn't like she was kissing her, her old dad,
And he was really healthy. He was really a healthy influence for her. Burke has a history. With between the manslaughter thing and what he went through in prison, and he's
supposed to be the age of Roger, isn't he? Burke and Roger are supposed to be the same age.
Some around approximately, I think. Yeah. But it was obvious that they were trying to, they hadn't figured out where to put David yet, obviously. David is going to be a character later on when we get to that origin segment, and I don't want to get into that. And they'll find a place for him. But I think but they did find they needed Jeremiah. And what I think there was this trying to justification again where Jeremiah at this point is considered the evil guy that Barnabas hated and he ruined. And you're going to see another change later on, and we're not going to get into that right now. But at this point, Jeremiah, a.k.a. Burke, is Barnabas's rival for Vicky's affections.
Yeah, but I have really problems with some of the Burke stuff that they're doing with Victoria. Well, I mean, we're going to be touching on it now, and next week when we do 286, we're going to be touching on this a lot more. Mm-hmm. But the way that Burke talks to Vicky and treats Vicky is kind of like a stern dad. Go, no, you cannot do that. No, you're not going to accept that. No, and it's just like, how could you start a relationship? I mean, normally it's like you start a relationship and then if they're going to beat the hell out of you, they wait until they got you in their grasp. But this is kind of like you already started verbally abused Victoria. And I don't know what it's, I guess we're looking at this from a 2020 lens as well. But at that time, there's some of it that makes you feel uncomfortable. Like with the whole diary, and Barnabas presents his diary first says on the Burke, and Burke goes, you can't give that to her. And then he gives
a book.
Yes. And Barnabas gives Josette's diary to Victoria. And then he's saying, you shouldn't be living in the past. I'm like dictating to her how she should be living her life. And this is like supposed to be the beginning of their so-called romance. This is the beginning of the blooming of the romance that we're seeing here before we end.
Well, you got that when they made out in the back by the water fountain. Very romantic.
That's later.
Very romantic.
Much later.
That's the next block. And
that's much later.
Next block, that water feature is basically something that we need to discuss in the next block. Because if anyone's got pee anxiety, that's pretty much done it. I don't think everyone just ran to the bathroom every time. The next.
Well, you're going to find that others decide to make out by the gazebo and by the water fountain.
There's we spent money on this water feature. We're going to sure hell show this one off.
You're going to see that. But the thing is, but there's this really weird dynamic in the beginning of the, we're in the relationships at the beginning before we end this block. And there's a really kind of a strange dynamic that they got, this weird Burke and, I mean, the thing is like, at this point, even though Barnabas looks about 50 to 60 and Burke looks about 40 to 50, I would actually go with Barnabas if I was Victoria, looking from the beginning here up to, we are cutting off at 286 at the beginning of this, where she's quite touched by the Josette's diary that Barnabas has given her, and so rightly she should. And then Burke kind of grabs her arm and goes, "What are you doing?" Like pulls her back, and it's just kind of a weird kind of a dynamic that's going on.
Well, see, it's really interesting because I think Vicky doesn't have, or Alexandra Moltke doesn't have chemistry with Anthony George the way that Mitchell Ryan, you genuinely felt that Alexandra Moltke and Mitchell Ryan did have a certain amount of actual chemistry. So that's why the relationship was kind of understandable. I wouldn't see them as long lasting, but at least a temporary relationship would have made sense. But in that regard, it didn't make sense to me for them to last as long as they did. But also, Mitchell, maybe they did write for Anthony George's character, because I can't imagine Mitchell Ryan's Burke being anything but tender to Victoria, because he was always very tender towards her. Anthony George was always very rough.
Aggressive Burke always did have there was always this aggressive thing if he didn't get what he wanted.
But he didn't
get what he wanted.
And you see him trying that. And you see him trying that. By the way, I do want to interject. That was not Josette's diary. That was a book that Barnabas took out of the library and inscribed it to Vicky. And and of course, this is part of his plot to gradually get Vicky into more into the past.
So Barnabas has a library card?
A library in the old house.
Oh, okay.
In the old house. That would be nice.
The library open that dark.
Yeah. I'd like to see that library.
I'd like to check this book out.
Oh, yeah, maybe he does. Oh, he bit the librarian, so she opened it up for him at night. But no, so that's.
I thought it was Josette's diary.
No, it's a book, and the whole thing was he inscribed it That was one of the whole thing. I mean, Burke didn't want Barnabas giving it to Vicky, and he had a big fight with him about it. And then, he's just kind of holding it. And the Barnabas character is really smart here at this point. He wants to play the game, and he knows what's going to take place. She comes in there, and she says, "What's this book about?" And he said, "Oh, it's nothing. It's just this."
Wuthering Heights.
And then she looks at it. "Oh, but you inscribed it to me. Were you going to give this to me?" And then Burke says, "Well, I have a confession to make." So that's the whole scene going on. What you might be thinking of is earlier in the block, Carolyn is rummaging through Jason's room, and I think she finds his diary, and he comes in just as she's starting to read it, and they have a big fight. And that's when Jason's saying to her, "Carolyn, you're getting the hell out of here. The minute I marry your mother, you're out of here that night." So that was.
I mean, when did Jason? I didn't even know Jason could read or write. So
that's an excellent point. But she finds the book, and it looks like a diary because it has a clasp. And she opens it and she starts to read it, and then he walks in on her.
It's probably the
because she was
Collin's family bank account ledgers.
She was trying to find information so that way she could find an excuse logically why she should call off the wedding.
There you go. And that was the one where they had that blooper of the teleprompter in the portrait right next to the door. So everybody who needs reference.
Why doesn't Barnabas? I mean, the thing is, this is we've now seen Barnabas kill Jason McGuire. Why doesn't he feed on him? It's like a free meal. I found that a bit weird.
Maybe he didn't like Irish blood. Or
maybe he was talking too much alcohol.
Or perhaps he was afraid he was going to start talking like this now.
Afraid to get an accent.
That's correct. Sure, Megara. We'll do Donegal. That'll be another block. I'll sing Donegal for everybody. But
I mean, I guess going to that whole segment of the wedding. I mean, I think this is another reason why we're being cheated. We're talking about, Elizabeth is saying about the wedding, and we know that she's against it. Then we kind of get this whole thing about it's going to be a big wedding, everyone's going to come, and then we get the wedding in the drawing room. What was that about? You know what I mean? Because they're going, there's going to be the big wedding. It's going to be the wedding of the century. We're going to do it big. Everyone
wanted to have 20, 30.
I know, yeah.
I think
and we end up with Burke again. What is passive Burke doing at this bloody wedding?
Jason invited him.
But why? When did they ever spend time together? It's just kind of weird. It's almost like, we got to make sure we keep Burke in there. It's like, let's drag him in.
My take on it is...
And where was David? Why was David at the wedding?
For that matter, where was Barnabas?
The wedding took
place at night. Where was Barnabas?
Precisely. Where's Mrs. Johnson? Where was Mrs. Johnson?
She was busy cleaning the furniture upstairs.
Well, you think she would have been around with a tray of sherry giving it to them or something, or brandy or whatever.
Exactly.
Nobody picks up a thing around here.
That's right. That's right. Let's sakes.
But yeah, it was just kind of a weird thing. And then with Carolyn with the gun in the purse, I kind of wish she kind of did fire the gun because that would have been quite funny. Watching your hand whip back from the recoil. But the
whole business. Carolyn admitted to attempted murder practically, and I'm surprised they didn't arrest her for that. I mean, I was going to kill him. I mean, if that isn't attempted murder, I don't know what the hell was. She had motivation, she had intent, but of course, dumb Sheriff Patterson. Well, Sheriff Patterson's just looking to get out of the whole situation.
He's a paid-off cop. You could just pay him off with donuts like he used Spot. When the cannery whistle blows at noon, he knows it's time for lunch. That to him is a clue.
Not to detract from the really nice performance of Dana Elcar, who was really, of all the sheriffs, he was my favorite one. They had one on before him who was a constable. And he did the right thing, but Dana Elcar really was a no-nonsense, tough cop, and I think Dana Elcar had been in a cop show prior to that, so he was able to exude that. It's just unfortunately that Sheriff Patterson did everything wrong from a police standpoint. But other than that, let's not also forget, by the way, the Maggie thing that's going on at Wincliffe and Sarah popping in and out where people.
That was quite a nice scene when Sarah comes in and they get to escape. This is in this block, isn't it?
Oh, no, that was in the last block. We're talking about Maggie and Sarah and about how Maggie escaped from the room from the cellar room. Now, that was the last block. But
oh no, this is the one where Julia and her significant wisdom as a great doctor decides to take her back to the cemetery.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that, Keith. Is that behavior modification or aversive conditioning? I think it's aversive conditioning, quite frankly. I mean, she should have taken a cattle prod to her.
I just think that basically that's like, something happens and your family's been murdered in front of you and you're basically kind of having some kind of psychotic episode because of it, and you're on all this medication. That'd be like, let's go back to the crime scene where all the blood is. Yay, this will help you. And,
Jesse is trying to hypnotize Keith, by the way, because the fans don't see the video. He's
look
not,
at this.
This is, it's not what Julia would use to hypnotize.
No, this is more interesting.
Later on.
There's not enough sequins on it. No, there's not enough garish, tacky sequins.
Exactly. That looks like a spider, actually.
But it was a kind of a weird story device sort of thing. And it's almost, I guess, is to give a precursor that Maggie's going to be coming back into Collingswood. Well,
and the idea,
where he gets in the next block of episodes.
But I did think it was rather cute in the cemetery when she took her to the cemetery. And Burke and Vicky at the same time are going to the cemetery because Vicky has the morbid inclination to put flowers on Josette's grave.
Yeah, and Josette Day.
I kind of wish she just would have done that by herself. I didn't like that Burke was with her and then didn't see her and then just continued to tell her how crazy she is. You've been reading too many of those Barnabas books.
Passive-aggressive Burke. It's really passive-aggressive Burke. But I think the line was a kind of a MacGuffin kind of. I think it's a MacGuffin where the two of them are. Burke he goes, I don't see anybody in the cemetery, Vicky says, except for those two women over there. Who are they? And I mean, it's like they're almost kind of walking right by each other, and they don't recognize who they are. Except Vicky, at the last minute, sees Maggie's face, and then she goes, "That's Maggie Evans," and Burke thinks she's immediately crazy. But once again, you've got what I did like about that plot. Well, once again, Catherine Lee Scott shows her stuff a little with the London bridges falling down. Lock me up, lock her up, and starts to screech again. And that interplay between Woodard and Julia, between Robert Geringer and Grayson Hall, is very interesting. I think they play well off each other.
Yeah, I agree. I think they play.
Yeah,
very
they seem
well
like genuine friends. Like they work together, so it was very believable.
I have to sit there and say, just jumping just slightly back, and I think we need to cover this. Elizabeth being called to the Cliffs of Widows, I think was really well done. I think it's really well written. I love hearing the history, though. How Josette falls into one of these three widows is beyond me, because we have learned previous episodes that Josette was one of these three widows. Now we find out that Josette's not one of these three widows.
Well, that's another plot discrepancy.
But I think that was really well done, though. And, I think all of the three of us here have history with Dark Shadows, and we know that this plot device of Joan Bennett or Elizabeth's daughters going to some kind of delirium where she's going into a depressed dream state. This is kind of the beginning of it, and there's going to be a lot more of these to come with her.
Oh yeah.
But I mean, it was quite nice to see the beginning one, because I think this is probably the most original. And I liked the play between Elizabeth and Mrs. Johnson. I thought that was really, really well done.
Yep.
That whole segment was very, very well done.
Even though she had 5 sons instead of 5 sons. Other than that, I agree with you. And I think Joan Bennett that Joan Bennett and Alexander Mulkey really, really shone. I talked about that earlier. But the scene where Vicky convinces, and at one point, even Barnabas stops Elizabeth from jumping at an earlier point in this block. and Barnabas is concerned about her. And this really gets into, this is what I like about getting into the costume party and now talking about the 1795 characters, Joshua being the father, Naomi being the mother, cousin Millicent Collin. Well, they don't say she's a cousin, but Carolyn as Millicent. Because now, and of course Sarah, because now you're beginning to, for the first time, get a real feel for the characters that Barnabas lived in the origin story, and I thought that, geez, Jonathan in the original Barnabas costume, I mean, that was great. I mean, he's a spitting image of the portrait. It really was, and always fun to see Vicky in another seance again.
Yeah, I like the seance, but there are some problems with that. First of all, we got Roger, who previously was poo-poo seances. They're crap. They don't work. And now he's like, let's do a seance. And now he's become like the scholar.
He had too much sherry. He let loose his inhibition.
It's claret. It's claret. This time it's claret. Barnabas is getting them all drunk on claret at the party. But I agree.
And Josette got a French accent or not? Come on, Vicky, you've done this before. Well, you've talked with a French accent before.
She actually spoke in the French language before.
Precisely. And now Josette's back to being
now she's New York. Now she's New York,
Going to walk the car.
That's right. Yeah. Now Vicky's talking like Brooklyn, that kind of thing. No, but I think
it would have been nice. If they could have, kept on, keep that, because the French Josette speaking. I found that when we did get that in previous episodes, that was a really nice touch.
Oh, it was great.
Kind of lose that. You're kind of going.
When they had her speaking in fluent French, I thought that was great. And I said before, I don't think any soap opera had ever tried that. And you will see some fluent French again. We won't tell the fans when, but that's going to occur later on between two of the characters in the show. So they did go back to that.
I do have to say, with the fancy dress, we do know what side all the men dress on due to those nice trousers that they're wearing. So let's mention that there for all those keen eye viewers out there.
Did you notice, by the way, when Carolyn is looking through Burke's drawers and finds the diary, all his clothes are new. They don't look like they've been touched. And I'll think, with the exception maybe one shirt, and I think that's what they probably did. The costumer just bought a whole lot of them from Orbox and never bothered to open them.
Well, Jason very well could have done that too after taking Elizabeth's money and buying himself a few items.
Which he never got to. And it wasn't that nice that they decided to give all his effects to charity when he never came back.
Charity.
But another thing what Jesse and Vicky mentioned in the synopsis that I think that needs to be mentioned is that I think Barnabas can go into business here about how to store clothing for 200 years without them being mothball written, and they smell as fresh as a daisy because they don't take this stuff to the dry cleaner before they put this stuff on. And there's it's all nicely pressed and everything. If you could take that and market that, can you imagine? Like, store all your clothes.
That's a great point. What does Willie do with his laundry? Go to a laundromat with it, and
where does he go to the bathroom? I don't think the old house would have indoor bathrooms.
That's another thing. And
Barnabas always sent Willie off on just really random errands that nobody ever knew what they were. Like, he could have been selling jewelry selling jewelry every single time he would go out. It would just be jewelry and jewelry and jewelry. It's like,
he does mention that he sends
jewelry do you have? Why don't you just do it all at once and go on to?
He does mention that he sends them to the bank. I think Jason caught him once. But getting back to clothes, by the way, isn't it interesting that this is only the third coat that we've seen Joan Bennett wore since she started Dark Shadows? You would think that a wealthy lady like her would have had a whole array of, but she
never leaves the house. To be honest, if Joan Bennett was getting clothes, they would be through Sears and Roebuck's catalog company, wouldn't they? Really? Because she doesn't go out and get fitted, does she? So she just has to order them through the catalog.
Yeah.
Or Mrs. Johnson's in the back just sewing them up. No, this is going to like this new outfit.
I wouldn't. Or they could always send it over to Willie. I mean, he can do everything else, can he? I mean, he can do carpentry. He can do the.
If you hit him hard enough,
he can do the dishes. That kind of thing. So
if you suck enough of his blood or hit him hard enough, he can do anything.
That's for sure. So there are a number of plots that one plot ends and the other, and then of course the thing of Barnabas and Vicky, and I find that to be a very interesting, especially when Vicky dressed as Josette for the party. I actually think that picture of Josette in Josette's room looked more like Vicky. It doesn't look like Maggie at all. It doesn't look like Catherine Leigh Scott at all.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I can, without jumping too far ahead, I can understand why they did the switch because of the way the storyline goes. Well, it makes more sense with Victoria being in the position she is, that she finds herself in, and in the future episodes.
Yes.
And so it does make more sense than trying to find another character to be in that position, I guess. But it does fit Victoria's character that we've seen so far. From the beginning of the series all the way up, she's always looking for clues of who she is and who she wants to be and where she came from. And this does and there has been this fascination with Josette from the very first time that Josette appeared to her, when she was held captive by Matthew Morgan. And so this does make sense that she would take on this Josette role and feel protective of her, and to the point that's also the thing that she shares with David, their love and understanding of this Josette character. It
is brought out during this block, and I think it makes a lot of sense. Why is Vicky so entranced with the past and with Josette? And is it just because of what Barnabas thinks he's manipulating her? No, I think it's definitely more than that. And it is.
But you know what I also think it has to do, though, is I also have to think to do from a psychological point of view, and I'm sure they didn't think of this through there. But I think if you look at it from a psychological point of view, if you're a person with no past, meaning no parents or nothing to tie you to society or your place in life, I guess that you probably would be more fascinated by the past, because this is generations that you have no. I mean, we all know who our grandparents are. We have an idea who our great grandparents are, and we do have a sense of family history. All of us here. Right. And I guess from Victoria's point of view, if you are a foundling and you have no sense of any kind of past whatsoever and no connection to any family, then I think you would be probably fascinated by a past, and that maybe this, that you wanting a past so very, very much and needing this so much that you would be more than willing to bury yourself and buy yourself into this past, because because it's your fantasy world. This is what you want. Vicky's whole journey that we've seen from the beginning of Dark Shadows to here is finding her past, finding that she has a sense to belong to a family, be part of something. Well, I guess if you're an orphan, you're not part of anything, are you? So it does tie into that.
Well, you're absolutely right, but I just want to add that the writers did think of that, because Vicky, through the character of Vicky, she's talking about it, and she at one point says, "I don't have a family. It's no wonder that I want to associate myself with something that." That I can identify that. And she loves the past anyway. She was always fascinated by the past because she didn't have a past of her own.
I think it's really fascinating. No, not fascinating. It's kind of dumb and kind of frustrating how everybody acts like Vicky's fascination with the past is like a drug addiction. Like, it's so harmful that, you're actually going to get sucked up into the past if you keep talking about it. It's like, what is your issue with it? Like, why do you keep talking about it? Like, it's such a huge problem. It really isn't. And every episode, I would get annoyed by how much they would talk about how bad it was. It's like, just leave her alone, because you're talking about it is more annoying than, just letting her have her own hobby.
Yeah, I have to agree, especially when it comes to Burke, I can understand if he feels that way for whatever reason.
Well, Burke isn't retarded.
He's jealous. Yeah. He's jealous. He's frankly jealous.
But with the Collins family, their whole history, their whole place in society, their whole sense of being is so wrapped up in the past and what they were and where they come from. And then to have someone that's employed with them to sit there and want to embrace this, I can't see why they would criticize that.
Like Elizabeth.
maybe what it comes
I think most
down
families
to,
would embrace it.
maybe what it comes down to is that there's a saying, the past is dead, live in the present, the future has not been written yet. So,
but then again, you don't. This is where we get a bit weird with the Collins family. Anyway, they have this love of the past, but then there's also this. And the thing is, you don't really get it with the other characters, but with Elizabeth Stoddard's character, and this is why I always thought that it'd be quite interesting. They could have done something really interesting with the character. She seems to get very, very frustrated or upset when anything's mentioned about the past. Like, she is the gatekeeper to the hidden secrets of the Collins family, and then whoever becomes the matriarch or the person overtaking the Collins family, the next generation, she will pass this information knowledge on.
yeah.
And there always seems that Elizabeth has that. We're never quite.
You are going to see that later.
That was ruined, though, by the Jason McGuire storyline, because they made the basement just this stupid, trivial thing that didn't matter all this time. But before, that was like the supporting beams to the whole point of the story and like what was down there. And, you know, you had Vicky being Nancy Drew trying to discover what was down there. And you find out that it was because her husband was buried down there because she accidentally killed him. But then you find out that there was no body actually down there after all. And it kind of just did away with all of that. And it was it rebooted itself.
But this is where they screwed up as well, because the thing is that there's this locked room that she wears the key around her neck, and no one's allowed to go into this locked room. Did you see where Paul Stoddard was buried? Right next to the frickin' stairs. Not even in the locker room that she had the key around her neck for. It was right by the stairs. I was kind of like, what are you doing? It's like, so basically, if she didn't want anyone to go in the basement, she would lock the top basement door, and she wouldn't want anyone down there, because whenever they're walking to that secret room that she has the key for, they're walking over Paul Stoddard's body if he was there.
But he was buried. But he was buried in that room that she had to open the door.
But when they showed the scene, though, the stairs were behind them when they pulled up the.
I gotta look at that one.
When they pulled up the trunk, the stairs are behind them.
I don't remember. That's interesting.
Because basically, it's the same time to set up them. I don't think. Did we ever actually see that other room? I know they went down there at one point. They were.
In fact, I mentioned in the last block that he had to turn on the light. Jason walked into that room, turned on the light, and I said it was amazing that the light bulb was still functioning after 18 years.
Oh, okay, yeah, that's right.
Well, no, because Elizabeth regularly would go in and out of that.
But we didn't see it. But we didn't see it when she went in originally, and when the first Matthew Morgan was mourning. But then we did see. So my recollection, and I guess we'll figure this out for next week. But my recollection was that he was buried in that room. That's where Jason. Not Jason.
Okay.
What's his face? Sheriff Patterson and Burke were trying to dig it up, and found the trunk.
Was he a dwarf? Was Paul Stoddard a dwarf? Because only a dwarf would have fit in that trunk. I'm sorry.
He was sure.
They robbed.
Yeah, well, there you go.
They just Rob Zombied his body. They cut him up. They boiled parts of him, and they just put him in different trunks and shoved him in there.
I think also they wanted to keep him alive somehow, because they were figuring at some point they're going to bring that character back. And indeed, not now, fans, but indeed, that character will come back. And that's all I'm going to say about it. But I think, but they're doing that. Left the door open. They're doing that. Left the door open for that.
But see, what I don't understand also is why would you bury someone in your state? You got all this. You got hundreds and hundreds of acres of land. Why would you just bury him in the house? Why don't you just bury him out in the garden somewhere?
Because he couldn't carry him out. Remember, it took Barnabas and Willie to carry Jason out of there. It took 2 men.
Yeah, but they had to carry him up from the basement.
Should have had Morgan.
And they had to carry him 15 miles to Eagle Hill Cemetery.
Wasn't that fun? I mean, that was.
I guess we should probably get to that as well. Where in the hell is Eagle Hill Cemetery? If anyone knows, please email us at info@llpodcast.com.
That's right.
Because no one the hell knows where this thing is. It's 15 miles. It's 20 miles. And how did they get the body from the old house to Eagle Hill, because let's face it, there's probably no road to the old house because that driveway, no one drives up to the old house, so that's all grown over. That would have been some kind of dirt track that no one uses anymore.
I don't see why they couldn't have buried him in the old house cellar. You know, I mean, that old house cellar's got so many twisting, winding passages.
And that's another thing. Barnabas's casket kind of moves around a bit on its own sometimes, which we'll get more to in the next block because there's a bit of a story hole there. But you kind of wonder, is like, I mean, I can understand in a story, as a story sense goes, there is a bit of symmetry to bury some of Barnabas's victims into where he no longer vacates. So I can understand a bit of symmetry there, but you do kind of think, well, you know, but it does, and there's a lot more questions that are asked than are answered. It's like, how did they get
honestly,
there?
I always wondered why the hell Barnabas couldn't just have slept in a bed, like in his room. Like, why do you need the coffin? It would have taken a lot of suspicion away if people just saw you sleeping in a bed during the day. It would look weird.
Obviously, because they were trying to, Curtis was more interested in the traditional vampire shocker. Somebody sleeping. What you're talking about is something more for Forever Night, and that's years later in the 90s.
I mean, the thing is that Dan Curtis, as far as he wanted that coffin thing is the thing that kind of ties everything together in realistic terms. Though I do think that Barnabas so much wants to be human, and he so much regrets being a vampire, that I think that if this was written today in Dark Shadows, he probably would try to lead the most normal existence as possible. And to be honest, in 1960, they would have had those 1940s blackout curtains from World War II in his room, sort of thing. So I mean, it could have been very easily done, but I think Dan Curtis wanted to keep to the old tropes.
There's a little speech. There's a little speech there between Willie and Barnabas, which I think is kind of interesting because Willie tries to convince Vicky not to stay overnight because of the storm, and Barnabas catches him. And great line, by that you'll be rewarded for for what you're doing, Willie. I can guarantee you another lovely double entendre. But then Willie says, "Okay, kill me." He goes, "Okay, I admit it. I did try to protect her from you. Go ahead, kill me." "No, I'm not going to do that." He goes, "Why?" And then is it because are you? And Fred looks at him. Is it because I'm almost human? So there's a nice little speech there, and what we see developing now is the evolution of the sympathetic vampire that endeared all the fans. And that's evolving from the maniac that was running around doing all these horrible things to Maggie.
I have a question about Sarah Collins.
Mm-hmm.
She goes during the costume party. Sarah's creeping around Josette's room, and her dress is there, the same dress that she's wearing. How the hell did that happen? Because to be honest, if she's buried in that dress that she's running around with, how is there another dress there? Or did she just have like multiple dresses? Does Sarah Collins just have multiple dresses of the same dress?
Well, it's a good question, and we don't really. All of a sudden, she looks at it, and it's, oh, my blue dress. I didn't know where the hell that was, and I guess they needed some kind of change.
I guess when we go into color in the next segment, maybe we'll figure out if she's wearing a blue dress at the moment. But it was basically the same dress design that she's wearing.
Are we going into color in the next block, Keith?
Yes, we do.
Oh, that'll be interesting. That will be very interesting because, color...
we kind of bounce back and forth from color to black and white.
Well, that's only because some of the masters of the original episodes were lost. But what we do see in general, the black and white had its very, very interesting touch because it was chiaroscuro, and it reminded you of the 40s Universal horror cycle movies, and so it was good there. But when you get into color, it's a whole new dimension. It really does. And then they're able to really, and of course that combined with the psychedelic stuff in the 60s, they're able to use a lot of special effects such as blue screen, and it really gives you a tremendous almost a vibrato, if I could use the term, to the to the episodes. And you look at color and you say, how the heck could I have watched that in black and white? And you got to be
well, I have to say that some of the clothing was better looking in black and white. Some of the colors,
like all of Julia's, nothing Julia or Mrs. Stoddard. Well, there was one outfit or two that maybe looked really nice on Elizabeth, but the older women's clothes were not that appealing, especially Julia's. She always wore
that green coat,
ugly taupe and ugly like vomit green.
Yeah,
it was always poop colors and vomit colors.
Yep, puke yellow and piss green. And she had that pocketbook that she always used to carry with the green coat. And that of course is the subject of a lot of impersonations during the Dark Shadows convention, where either it was that or it was the white lab coat. But at this point, I don't think Grayson Hall's character has developed enough for that. You don't see, but you will see that in the future. One thing also that Vicky said, I thought this was really prophetic, and there was one line when Julia first comes to Collingswood and Vicky's talking with her, and Vicky tells her about Barnabas. He says, I think you two are really going to get along very well. And this was before any of all what you're going to see happens between the relationship, which we won't get into which we will get into later. But this is, I don't know whether they put that out as a teaser, whether they had that, where they always had. I don't think they had that. In fact, they didn't have that.
Yeah, I don't think they did.
They did. They did.
The original Bible that they wrote, I don't think
Art Wallace
included even most of the original series before
That's correct.
They introduced any of the supernatural elements. It was so unrelated to the show that we ended up getting. And I remember they were going to originally make Elizabeth like a piano music teacher or something, but they had a brief reference to that, like the first couple episodes where Elizabeth was seen playing the piano.
Well, that I didn't see, but what I did, I have Shadows on the Wall, and I've read from that.
Oh.
Yeah, I got a great deal on it too, but I've read from that. Originally, the way it would have gone, they had Bill Malloy living. They had Roger being killed off. It's fascinating to see some of the stuff that Art Wallace originally had, in mind for that. And I think there was going to be a violent love affair between Burke and Vicky also.
Violent? Oh, no.
Oh, yeah, well, not violent in terms of beating each other, like really hot, real hot, sexy. They were going to make a real hot, sexy torch scene out of Vicky and Burke. They could never have done that with the second one. They could never have done that with Anthony George.
No, Anthony George is so boring. Ugh.
Well, that's how you call him Passive Burke.
But Mitch Ryan, definitely that the sparks could have flown.
Well, Mitch Ryan was virile, wasn't he? He was a man's man. There's something very virile about him. With Anthony George,
he's definitely
he's like a wet noodle hitting you in the face. It's like it's just annoying. It's just annoying. That's all he is. I mean. Yeah. I guess we probably should cover a little bit of Julia Hoffman coming to Collingswood to write a family history.
Yes.
As Tom probably's come in contact with, and I have, when you're asking people to do interviews, it's probably not best to use a steamroller or just steamroll your way into someone's door to ask them if you can write something about them.
Correct.
It kind of makes you wonder, it's kind of weird, but this is where we kind of get things. I love the way Elizabeth reacts to Julia. I found it very kind of odd that she's like, no, I don't want this written about, even though they tend to bring out the family history book all the time and discuss it, especially David does as well. And this is kind of David's trope, but Elizabeth kind of likes to influence David to know about the family history. She's very proud of the family history. So when she mentions Elizabeth, and Elizabeth is less thrilled about this happening, that kind of felt like out of character. But I think they redeem themselves when we get Barnabas. Is that Barnabas is intrigued by it, but he refrains back, and you know why he refrains back, because there's a reasoning behind that. Because you don't want her digging too deep into the ancestry because it might expose Barnabas, and I can understand that.
That's why it just makes sense with Elizabeth, because Elizabeth had no real reason. It was just an out of the blue, like, no, there was no logic behind why she wouldn't, because everything with the past of her situation with her husband being, down there. And it wasn't even like that past. It was a different past, which doesn't make sense. There's no harm done for that. Yeah. And you'd think that would be something interesting, especially if their family is, which I don't know if their family publicly is, you don't know much about the reputation except that they're kind of spooky and kooky.
Well, we do know that they're one of the oldest families in America.
Yeah, so you think that they would
Julia
want to share that.
Because I'm writing a book about the oldest families in America, the oldest families that have been established in America. And Collin's family's there. I think she says there's other families that she's doing as well. So we know that's what she's saying. And they're buying this. So obviously that, they're proud of their heritage, and Elizabeth's very proud of her heritage. So yeah, I have to agree. It seems just a bit off, like, I can understand Roger sort of thing, because, Roger can be a bit funny about things. But for Elizabeth, it's kind of like, it just seemed odd to me.
And of course, again, the Barnabas character being reticent about talking about it, I think it's completely within character, because Barnabas is family. Family comes first. Now, what is this person? I mean, he makes a special exception to the rule, inviting Vicky to the party, because he obviously wants to make her one of the family, literally. But the idea, and of course, Liz was sleeping upstairs or resting upstairs when Julia came to meet everybody, and she does meet David, and David gives her a little oh wow, oh there's a lot of books in the bedroom and in the library, in the Collinwood library. She goes, oh, there's a lot. Remember, David and Willie were going through the Collinwood library, so we've actually seen that in the past. Mm-hmm. But the idea of but Barnabas is paranoid anyway, by definition.
Well, so, another thing is you really, Barnabas comes from that time period, which we know. And we know that, from what we know about Barnabas, we know that he's been chained up for however long until Willie unchains him. So yeah. We know that he comes from that past. So I can understand that you might not want someone to dig too much, because if you dig too much, the truth could be written somewhere out there that they haven't discovered yet. So I can understand that. But then, this is another slight problem I have with Julia's introduction to Barnabas. It's quite well done, but we've kind of gone from a woman of science who now believes in the supernatural, which, to be honest, and I don't know if this is a jump ahead in this kind of thing. Are we entering, but you would think that Julia would be more skeptical about supernatural things. Well,
remember, we have not been introduced. Julia has not met Barnabas yet in this block.
Well, yeah, she does meet Barnabas. She meets Barnabas because she
this block?
She goes to the old house and asks Barnabas, and Barnabas says that I'm not, he's intrigued by it, but he's not interested in helping Julia with the.
I'll have to check that one.
But I do believe I remember, I might be wrong, but I'm pretty sure it was insinuated, not explained thoroughly, that her and Dave Woodard used to work together on they almost insinuated as if it was like special pseudoscience projects. So it seemed like they already were delving into something.
I didn't pick that.
Later on, it's established that they both went to medical school together.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure in the conversation they talked about, even like when she would talk to Dave Woodard about certain things, it seemed like she was kind of letting him in on something that they had previously worked on, but that it was kind of supernatural. But then she changed the word supernatural because we kind of ultimately underestimate what is natural in our world. I remember something like that was going on, but whenever I would watch that, I was always under the impression that they kind of knew and believed in the supernatural, and that's why their work was unconventional. But Dave Woodard also introduced Julia as someone who has unconventional practices. So it's kind of introduced that way, I think, from the beginning. but it was never explained thoroughly. I think that's the problem.
Also,
to me, when he said unconditional practices, I thought like taking people on field trips to cemeteries as part of it. I was looking at
if you ask, but he didn't want her to do that. He was dead set against it because he felt it would be going too far. It would drive her crazy. And she said, "Well, no, I think we ought to do this." And by the way, incidentally, the way it was originally, according to what the writer, remember, the Barnabas thing was only supposed to be for 6 weeks or so, and the writers originally had Dave Woodard, as a result of analyzing the blood slides, alerting the whole townsfolk who went with pitchforks and encountered Barnabas in the old house and staked him or destroyed him. And Julia, I heard somewhere, was supposed to have died in a vat of acid, and that would have been the original ending for Julia. And don't ask me how it winds up in a vat of acid.
To be honest, I kind of wish they kind of. To be honest, I love what's coming up, and I love the big storyline that's coming up. But after that storyline, we're going to have a lot of meandering storytelling going on.
Yeah, there's a lot of that. It does get.
It would have been quite nice
because
we are going to go. I mean, this show does become the Barnabas and Julia hour.
Well, it's the Barnabas Collins picture show. That's what exactly happens.
And sometimes, and we do lose a little bit with that sometimes, but. Mm-hmm. I mean, but what I found very strange, though, is when Julia finally goes to the old house to meet Barnabas, and then she has like all these odd statements about past lives and house decorations and stuff like this, and that's why I found so I didn't pick up about her having like when as you were saying that she has odd means of practicing. I thought that this is more about her therapy methods. But then it does now make sense from what you're saying, Jesse.
Yeah.
Now, before we close off this segment, let's talk about Victoria's night at the old house, spending the night with Barnabas in Josette's room. I quite like this, actually. I like the way that the storm always seems to show up. I do find Barnabas's pillow talk a little bit frightening. This is the way that he woos women to spend the night with him. I mean, okay, I know there's nothing romantic going on at this point, but to sit there and say how he likes thunderstorms and how they really get him going and all this other stuff. You're kind of thinking,
those looks of lust at the end of the scene, where he's looking. And by the way, one of the bloopers, he's looking at her from the right side, our right, at the end of the scene, and then the next day he's looking at her from the left side. So that's another blooper.
Well, he was admiring her birthing hips.
He was admiring her neck. That's what it really comes. But Fred was very good at those. He always Vicky called him, I think, a hot. He was just a pervert. Vicky called him a pervert when he first got on, and I think
there's something about Lecce about Barnabas.
And you see that lecherous look. You do see that. Oh, Jonathan Frid was great with that. You do see that lecherous look when she says something that's a double entendre, and he's like, "Oh, I can't wait for you." You see it in his eyes. I think it's very good emoting on Frid's part.
Yeah, you'd have to find, if you did a modern interpretation, you definitely would have to kind of reinvent that, because that wouldn't fly in today's cinema very well unless you were doing a parody like Tim Burton did.
Right, and that's quite another story. But I think, remember that the original, everybody was playing this. It was campy, but everybody was playing this to be as serious as they could. And of course, because of the Broadway actors that they had, actors with Broadway background, that kind of contributed to it. And Jonathan Frid being a Shakespearean actor, so all that he was able to bring to a Shakespearean role, he brought to Barnabas.
Yeah, when I watched the show, I never interpreted it as something that was trying to be funny. It was always very serious to me. That's why, and because the acting is so well done, any mistake or any blooper kind of goes under the radar. I don't really care about it. It doesn't make the show worse because the acting is so well done. And it's better than any modern TV show that I've seen on, like, the CW especially. Because the CW has a lot of, like, really cringy like scripts and words that they use in a lot of their scripts, and teenage characters that aren't realistic to teenagers. And I don't know. I just think that Dark Shadows did a really good job. So when people say that they got a campy vibe from it or like a comedic, parody vibe, I never did.
It's just that the bloopers, and of course we've talked about this before you came on board, the bloopers always have added to the show because of the origin. Curtis did not want to do it. Curtis didn't have the budget to do them over, except on very rare occasions. He'd go crazy if they had to redo a take. And he said, well, people are never going to watch this anyway. It's going to be shown once to housewives.
Well, to be honest, that's what should have happened. I mean,
but
it hasn't, but that's not, but right. it did live in it.
But that's why he let them go. That's why he let them go. And I mean, you have some really crazy bloopers coming up. And that's why fans stay tuned to us. Because
soap operas are not viewed again. I mean, can go back and find an early episode of General Hospital or any of these soap operas.
And that was because of a fire. And that was because of a fire that occurred in the ABC Vault Studios in the early 70s, and a lot of it was wiped out, which is why you can't find a lot. And Curtis was smart in that he had to pay money, but he saved all those kinescopes. He bought all those kinescopes. And that's why we can see Dark Shadows today. It's the only soap opera of that era where you can see every episode.
Yeah, because otherwise, if the show went on any longer, they probably would have taped over the early episodes and used that tape as well.
Well, it would have been interesting.
They used to recycle tapes for old soap operas as well, like Edge of Night, anything that in the 50s. By the time they got to the 60s, they were actually taping over the 50 episodes, the episodes from the 50s.
Well, of course, when we're near the end of this retrospective, which is going to be in a few years, we can talk about what would have happened if Dark Shadows were to go on in its original form. And they were having plans, but obviously Fred was a linchpin, and he became a linchpin. So for better or for worse, but Dark Shadows is admired now for the bloopers and the fact that, remember, they had to run from set to set. This was not like today where they just
stop the tape.
They stop the tape. They do it routinely, but they had to run from set to set. It was called live on tape, and that's why and the fact that it was able to be done so expertly in terms of what was involved and to keep the psychic distance. I really think that was incredible.
So that now brings us to character breaks. And what's in our character breaks is where we discuss favorite characters for these episodes and least favorite characters for these episodes and why. And we're going to start with you, Jesse. Who's your favorite character for this block, and who's your least favorite character this block, and why?
Oh, jeez. Oh, that is so hard. This was a transitional period where everybody was kind of, in my mind, changing like where they fit in my, priority favorite list. I always wanted to like Victoria and Barnabas during this period. Elizabeth was like, a lot of these characters were beginning to like not really fit. So I was having issues. I hate Burke. Didn't like Burke. Never liked him. The minute he showed up, I didn't like him because he's everything bad that everyone says. He's just, he is a wet noodle. So I guess Barnabas, Vicky, I don't know. I'm trying to remember. I like the introduction of Julia. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe, Barnabas, Julia, or Vicky. One of those three. I don't know.
What about yourself, Tom?
Well, I'm gonna say I would say it's a toss-up, this one, between Joan Bennett and Alexandra Moltke, because they had some really strong scenes between them in terms of resolving the suicide plot, which really kind of strengthened their relationship. I want to give an honorable mention to House Jameson, who only appeared in 2 episodes. But he was a good judge, and he had his lines, although there was one reference that I read where it said that he stepped on a line of Jason Patrick's. But I don't know. I think if you can really considered, and he was only on for 2 episodes. I think he was. I think he was great. I think he was well prepared. So I give him an honorable mention. I am going to say for the worst character, I'm going to say Anthony George. They didn't give him anything to do. He's coming off like a Yutz. At the party, this was great. For a while, I mean, with the seance, I don't know what he was. I guess while all the other characters were talking, where does he go? He goes to the back of the drawing room to light candles, and then he just stays there. He was obviously not supposed to be seen while these other characters were talking. And after a while, he's fidgeting around with putting the candles on. Then he does nothing. And he just stands there looking at the wall like he's a kid in the corner being punished. Like he's being punished for something, like they put a dunce cap on him.
I don't honestly know why he would have come to the party in real life. I don't know that he would have come.
Yeah. So worst character in this case, unfortunately, has got to go there. And with all due respect to Anthony George, may he rest in peace because he passed away 20 years ago. He is on TV, and I said this in the last block. He's a nice guy. He was given all the nice guy roles on TV, and so he happens to physically look like Mitchell Ryan, and I think that's why he was chosen to be the next. But he does look like him a little bit. But he is not used to playing mean guys. He was on The Untouchables. He was a nice guy with Robert Stack, even. And I mean, if he could be a nice guy with Robert Stack, for God's sakes, he's not used to playing meanies. It's not his forte. He was miscast, in my opinion.
Yeah. But to me, he's like, you hire Ron Howard and you get his brother Clint. It's kind of like that. It's like,
yeah, with the Tranya, from Star Trek, no, I agree with you. So my worst pick is Anthony George.
My worst pick is going to be Passive Burke. It's not working for me. Everything's coming across. It's like watching bread mold. It's just not that exciting. And I said before, I don't think it's the actors. I do kind of wish that the writers did a Willy on him and gave him a 180 and changed his character to fit, because they could have done that, because he could have mellowed out, because his story did mellow out. His storyline ended as soon as he found out about the crash and what happened that fateful night. And they could have changed his character, and they could have done something interesting with his character. But what we get is old Burke in a brand new version of Dark Shadows. Dark Shadows has changed since Burke appeared, and I think the character needs to change to fit into these storylines. As far as favorite is concerned, unfortunately, it's very hard because I don't think anyone was very consistent through this block. This block is a very, very strange block.
Yeah.
But I love segments. I love Elizabeth's daughter, or Joan Bennett, and her one of many to come. Thing about death, where she's become overly interested in death, and I think that was very well done. That scene between her and Mrs. Johnson was fantastic. Her and Barnabas on the cliffs were fantastic. And
also Vicky.
Her opening to Vicky about what really happened was fantastically well done.
Great scene. And she was a good screamer too, Joan Bennett. She was a good screamer. She could have been the scream queen. She was, and my understanding also is she had a lot of work to do the week of the 1949 flashback. I think there was a 6-day week that week, and she was in like 4 or 5 of the episodes, so she had a lot of lines to do, and that I think took something out of her. And you can see her looking at the teleprompter from time to time, as they all did, but she looked at it a little more often. But I agree with you; she did a great job considering all that pressure.
Yeah, but then again, by the time we get to the end of the block, she's kind of again. Hoffman is kind of hard to figure out what her place is at this point. I mean, being a fan of the show, we know where she's going. But looking at this block, it's kind of hard to place her.
No,
Willie has some good moments. Barnabas has some good moments.
Yeah.
But I guess in this block, it's really hard to find a favorite because none of them were consistent all the way through this block. This is
it was going through a transitionary period, I think, because the Jason McGuire storyline took a lot, and that was one of the meandering plots.
They did it quick
for the
and
longest
dirty.
time. So once you get rid of that, it's like you have to start over, and you kind of have to remember where characters were before that, what they're going to do after that. So I think that's why it was, more of a transition period.
And also remember a couple of those great lines. The sea is my grave is the sea. That was that established a kind of a mood. I don't know whether that was stolen from somewhere else, but and the other one was when, after she tells the story and she's looking at the key, and she said, and she's looking at the key and said, and because of this, I was a prisoner of Collingswood forever. That was, it was nice. It was nice touches.
Yeah. So now I guess we will go on to Morning Has Broken, and we'll start with Jesse again. What are your final thoughts of these episodes?
I did like this. I like all of these stories with Julia entering Collinwood, Barnabas, and then the growing obsession with Victoria's obsession with Josette in the past and things like that. I think those are exciting. They lead to some exciting stuff. Julia's beginning dynamic with Barnabas is what was the most appealing to me initially, because I don't think you ever seen that on TV, maybe even in film at that time, with the doctor and working in the supernatural realm. I don't think you ever seen that. That was something more new to me at that point. Like, it was something that I hadn't really seen much of when I first watched the show. So that one stuck out to me the most as the most intriguing storyline.
And what about yourself, Tom? What's your final thoughts of these episodes?
Basically, I think they're really starting to, they ditched the Jason thing. I think they could have done a lot better with it. I would have liked to have seen him stay on a little longer, quite frankly. I think that if he could, knowing what he knew already about Barnabas, or what he was starting to know, if there was some way they could have kept him prisoner or something like that, or maybe Barnabas bit him and made him a servant or something like that, the way he did with Willie, and to see, or just keep him around in some way. I think that, but it was very obvious that they wanted to transition and they really wanted to get away, and the McGuire character was already beginning to be dead weight. I like the costume party followed by the seance. For me personally, one of the most charming moments of the show for that particular period of time, and they were really trying out how putting those characters in those roles, and it's really interesting to see Roger as Joshua, talking like Roger, and Carolyn as Millicent. And for the fans later on, Millicent is going to be quite a different kind of character. You're going to see Millicent again, but here she's talking as Carolyn, and I think it was, and I think it was very interesting. They were trying out, they were experimenting, and you could see it happening. And of course, I know that Joan Bennett loved to put those period costumes on. She always used to talk about it. She looked like a queen in that episode. Really, she did, with that tiara. And she walked into the room and she just was unbelievable. And she auditioned for Gone with the Wind back in '39. You could actually see she might have gotten it if she looked like that. I saw Tara. I saw the Tara character in her. I didn't see Fiddle-Dee-Dee, but she was. So I like those. You have a number of plots starting now, and to take over the one that was just done, and they are interesting. They're very interesting.
My final thoughts of these episodes, I think there's some brilliance and there's some real cat going on here. I'm sorry, but I like bits and pieces of it. I think as a month of episodes I think if you came in at the right time, this probably would have captured you. But then if you got in the wrong time, you probably never watched the show again. But there's a lot of for me though, there's a lot of missed opportunities, and I think that. And we have, as far as lines are concerned, we have some of the best lines for Dark Shadows written for some of these characters. But then we have some of the worst storylines going on for these characters at the same time. So there's kind of like this kind of a weird jumble for me. I didn't connect with this. Next week when we discuss 286 to
309 or something like that. Yeah.
I think things come together, and that's a lot stronger block than this block. For me, but saying that, there's enough there to keep you interested. There's some stuff there that makes me roll my eyes and like get on with it. But then there's some great stuff in there, like Maggie, the cemetery, Maggie going to the cemetery, Julia Hoffman coming into the storyline, the actual interface between Barnabas and Willie I quite liked. I like, what's going on with Elizabeth at the beginning of the block, though, and the costume party was fun and sort of thing. So there's bits of brilliance, but there's also bits of stuff that's just like, for God's sakes, really, people. So for me, this is an uneven block. So you see some greatness coming. You see some storylines finally coming to an end, which, I have to sit there and say, I think that what sours me the most is the Paul Stoddard storyline, because, we've had a year's worth of Dark Shadows episodes at this point. The show was going into its year anniversary at this point.
It's incredible.
And
I remember when we started. God.
Yeah, and to have all this whole huge build-up, and they've been throwing this, it's like watching your favorite TV show, and they get canceled, so you get like this really shitty ending. And it kind of reminded me of that. Let's throw this out there and throw it out. We don't care about the fans. We don't care about anything. We just need to shove this out. And that's what it kind of felt to me. But overall, though, I said before, there is some brilliance in here to actually contradict what we just saw.
Oh yeah, and let's not forget the Jonathan Frid speak, which we never really touched upon, but there were a few fumbles, and also the looks, the way he's able to emote at the camera. I mean, that's pure Barnabas. I mean, he's really, you either charm the hell out of you or scare the hell out of you, depending upon the mood range. And I have to hand it to Jonathan. He had a definite mood range, an acting range there.
But yeah, I have to say there's some really good Jonathan Frid stuff going on here as well. So I agree with that.
Yeah.
So that brings us to the end of the Literary License Podcast, Dark Shadows, episodes 266 to 285. Next week, we'll be covering Dark Shadows, episodes 286 to 309. And we'll carry on with some fantastic stuff going on at that point. Of course, you can also follow us on our website at www.llpodcast.com. And you can also join out to our newsletter and be a subscriber at www.llpodcast.com, and join up and you'll get your monthly newsletter, which will give you ideas of what's coming on with competitions. And you yourself can now win a Literary License Podcast t-shirt with the new t-shirt designs coming later on for season 4, which will be on your doorstep in September. And, of course, you can also follow us on our social media, which also includes Facebook, Twitter, and Pinterest, and, of course, Tumblr. And make sure you also look for all our book reviews. And, of course, you can find us on very many different kind of podcasts. What you're listening to now is fantastic. But if something happens, you want to look at other platforms, we're also on podcast, Alexa, Amazon Alexa. Go to Amazon Alexa. Say, Alexa, play the Literary License Podcast, and it will bring you because we're now on that. And, of course, on YouTube, Podbean, SoundCloud, Spreaker, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
This has been a Literary License Podcast production. If you cry for help, there's no help.